So we're back in the Gospel of Matthew, and we know that up to this point, I talked about the lineage that Jesus was part of the lifeline through King David. And we then looked at how Jesus or John the Baptist came into the picture, proclaiming the kingdom of heaven is near. And then Jesus came and went and got baptized by John. And that was to fulfill the scriptures. That's part of that fulfillment. And John said, "No, I can't do this. You should be baptizing me." He said, "Absolutely not. We need to fulfill everything the way that God has planned it." And so he was baptized, and then the Spirit came upon him, and God said, "This is my son who I'm well pleased." And immediately the Spirit of God led Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted by the adversary. And so after 40 days, he was being tempted and came out of the wilderness after being ministered to by angels and went to Galilee and started selecting those who he chose to follow him, and then went to Capernaum. And that's where we left off, was when Jesus went to Capernaum in that area. And the word was going out about him all throughout the countryside, that whole region. Now realize this, that Matthew was a tax collector, and he was probably a fairly educated man, but surely none of the apostles, except for maybe Paul, were deemed as really educated. They were simple men who were hardworking, and the Lord saw that quality in them, that their hearts were true, and chose them. And when he chose them, they were true and they followed him. We know everyone except for Judas, who allowed the world to get under his skin, and he never really committed himself, even though he tasted and experienced the power of the Holy Spirit and did many miracles along with the other apostles. So Matthew, we can't forget that Matthew was right there. He was one of those chosen. He was one of those apostles. And so as we get ready to get into Matthew chapter 5, when I say Matthew 5, think about 5, 6, and 7. And the reason why, and that'll be the next few times we get together. This is what mankind is titled the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I say that's because mankind, in fact, it's a great story to go ahead and put in Hollywood and in movies. And because of it, it's embellished, and it's, based on the story. It's not necessarily the story, but it's based on the story. A lot of movies, a lot of things. And in fact, there's a whole new series out called The Chosen that really was heretical in illustrating what happened here with Jesus. But that should come as no surprise, because the whole um, program is pretty much like that. But here they treated Matthew like he was a savant, maybe a little autistic, and he was not treated the same as everyone else. And according to this version that the Chosen put out, was that they built this stage up on this mountain, and it was this long, drawn out process getting ready for this great sermon that was going to happen. And this great sermon was one that Jesus was going to deliver. And, he was having such a hard time writing it that he ended up turning to Matthew, and he asked him, "Could you help me? Help me write this sermon, because it's a really big one and a lot of responsibility." And that Matthew actually helped write the sermon, and that Jesus then put the theatrical performance on the side of this mountain. Well, this is not exactly what happened. In fact, this is not at all what happened. And we're going to see the beginning of what happened right here. The term sermon isn't specifically used here at all. It's been used to replace the phrase, "and he began to teach them." And who was the them? Was his disciples. Now, were the crowds around there? Yes, they were. But he turned to his disciples. Now, there was a number of disciples there, but certainly he was addressing his disciples. Now, what's the difference between the disciples and the crowds? Many people in the crowd were there just to watch the magic show, as I've mentioned before. They wanted to see the Jerry Springer stuff. They wanted to go ahead and just awe and say, oh, look what he did over there, and take selfies and tell people that they were there. And, that's just like human nature that was in the crowds. Or maybe they were religious leaders that wanted to find a way to challenge him, or they wanted something to argue about. And then there were others who were just curious. But among them were some disciples. And those disciples were people who were truly trying to learn from Jesus, and they were following him as their rabbi, as their teacher, not as some guy out there doing all these magnificent things, not going there to selfishly be healed, but going there to learn from Jesus. And those were his disciples, and that's who Jesus turned to. And the term mountain, a lot of people think this was a big mountain, but it's actually translated from the Greek word oros, which means mountain or hill. Now, there aren't huge, great mountains in the area where they say that this took place, because it was in the region of Galilee. And so it was probably more of a hill, which seems not flat. In other words, that's what a hill or a mountain is not flat land. And so the actual Greek translation says that it was a mountain or a hill. Now, before we get into what Matthew wrote, I want to take a quick glimpse at what Luke was a very educated man. He would be considered a PhD today. He was a doctor and, a physician. He wrote this. He said in chapter 6, verse 17 through 19, then Jesus came down with them. Well, where did he come down from? The hill. And he stood on a level place. And a large crowd of his disciples was there, along with a number of people from all over Judea, Jerusalem, and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come there to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those troubled by unclean spirits were healed. The entire crowd was trying to touch Jesus because power was coming out from him. And he was healing them all. And then is what starts what's called the Sermon on the Mount. It says, looking up at his disciples, Jesus said, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God, etc. We'll get into Luke later on when we move on from Matthew. But I wanted to share that because you'll see some similarity in what Matthew wrote, but you'll also see that it doesn't fit the Hollywood cinema production that tries to make this sermon something that was well planned, that Jesus wasn't capable of doing in the eyes of even some people who are making more modern renditions of this. So here we go into chapter 5. And it says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and that's that same word, oros, on the hill, and he sat down. Now his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. Now, this is very different than him standing up at a podium with a loudspeaker and teaching this crowd of thousands and thousands of people. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, mind you, he's talking to his disciples. And he's saying, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. He knew many of his disciples were outcasts, were broken people, came from a very sinful background. They came to be healed, just physically, but spiritually. And he's telling them, blessed are those who are in these conditions. He's not saying, go and do these things or become poor and then you'll be blessed, which is what many people are teaching out there. He said, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who do mourn, because they will be comforted. Those who are meek, as they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness, because they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's us. He's talking to his disciples. Blessed are you when people insult you and they persecute you and they falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its savor, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they set it on a stand and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, now he's still talking with us here. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I'm not come to abolish them, but I have come to fulfill them. For I tell you truly, until heaven and earth pass away, not a single jot, not a stroke of a pen will disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And that's what he came for, was to accomplish just that. So then, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and it teaches others to do likewise will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, who were the most devout religious people that claim to be God's people, he said, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And then he says this phrase, which he'll say many other times, you have heard that it was said. Now, he would say it's God's law if he was talking specifically about God's law. But he says, you have heard that it was said to the ancients, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. See how the Lord is augmenting the old law and introducing the new covenant. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Not that you murdered him, but because of your anger. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, worthless, or you foolish person, will be subject to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, stupid, will be subject to the fire of hell. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift before the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Reconcile quickly with your adversary while you are still on the way to the court, before you get to the court. Otherwise, he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you that you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. He's talking about the condition of our souls and the spiritual, supernatural nature of what happens when our hearts are either hardened or when we have a change of heart and they're softened. Then he goes on to say, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery. And trust me, he meant any woman that looks after a man, the same thing, has already committed adultery in their heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, some people take this literally and they go around judging people and they become very legalistic in how they judge people. Well, I always wonder, how come you still have both of your eyes then? And then Jesus goes on and he says, and if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to depart into hell. It has also been said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality brings adultery upon her. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. This was a cultural norm that was becoming more acceptable to those who were progressive in the Jewish faith. And Jesus was addressing it. Again, you have heard that it was said to the ancients, do not break your oath or fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I tell you not to swear at all, either by heaven or for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor should you swear by your head, for you cannot make a single hair white or black. What I want you to do, he said, was simply let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything more comes from the evil one. How many times today do we see that people say, oh, I swear on the Bible. I swear on this, I swear on that. Jesus said, let your yes be yes, and leave it at that. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, not to resist an evil person. If someone should slap you on your right cheek, turn them the other also. If someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let them have your cloak as well. And if someone forces you to go 1 mile, offer them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away to the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. You know, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, and that's the only ones you love, what reward will you get? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even Gentiles do the same thing? Be perfect, meaning complete, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And that concludes chapter 5. And as we get into chapter 6 and chapter 7, you'll see how Jesus continued to teach his disciples. Now, this is called by many the greatest sermon ever told. Well, this was Jesus' teaching. I'm sure that there was a lot of sermons that Jesus taught, as we could call it a sermon, that didn't get captured in the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Luke or the Gospel of Matthew. But we do know that this one was written not only by Matthew, and Luke similarly captures some of the same thing, and for good reason, because it shows how deeply Jesus was involved in teaching his disciples the truth, the way, and the life that is only found in him, not what was said, not the old law, not the old covenant, because Jesus was to fulfill those things. But what he was sharing with his disciples is the new covenant. So follow me and I will teach you the way. And that concludes chapter 5 of the Gospel of Matthew.